Hey, I want to tell you guys about another podcast I think you'll love. Deep Cover Mobland is a true story of a high-rolling Chicago lawyer named Robert Cooley who helped the outfit fix cases from traffic tickets to murder. Then he went undercover to take them down. You guys are probably familiar with the murder case he fixed for outfit hitman Harry Aileman. This resulted in Aileman walking from the murder of Billy Logan. After Cooley turned, he testified that he had bribed the judge in Aileman's first trial. The next judge ordered a new trial, and he convicted Aileman of murder. Like the feds, Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist Jake Halpern got Cooley to talk, and they take listeners on a wild journey into a world of corruption, murder, and mayhem in Chicago. You can listen to Deep Cover Mobland wherever you get your podcast. And on a personal note, I love this podcast, man. I had already listened to their first season about an FBI agent who started working a Midwest motorcycle gang drug case, and he ended up following the string that took down Manuel Noriega.
You are listening to Gangland Wire, hosted by former Kansas City Police Intelligence Unit Detective Gary Jenkins.
Well, welcome all you wiretappers out there. I'm here in the studio of Gangland Wire. I've got on the Zoom call and the audio line, retired special agent Michael McGowan from the FBI, who has had some really interesting experiences over the years working undercover on the mob. And he's got a great Eastern accent, which I know a lot of you guys like. So welcome, Michael. I'm really happy to have you on the show.
Thank you, Gary. Appreciate you having me.
So you got a book out there. Let me see. Ghost, my 30 years as an undercover FBI agent. Now, you kind of almost predate Joe Pistone, don't you?
No, Pistone was one generation before me.
Oh, okay.
He was a mentor and, set the gold standard for FBI undercover work, and pleased to be able to call him a friend.
Good. I had him on the show. Actually, got another little soundbite from him for another show. He's really an interesting guy, and I know I've talked to other FBI agents who've worked undercover. Ray Morrow from Cleveland, and he said when he got in the middle of his deep cover assignment that he was having problems, and they sent him to talk to Joe Pistone, who kind of set him straight and told him how the cow ate the cabbage, as we say here in the Midwest, and got him back on track. And I know he's been an inspiration to every undercover FBI agent, truly undercover FBI agent that has come along since him. So I think the whole country owes him a debt of gratitude, because you guys have done a lot of work that wouldn't have. You can't even explain, folks, what this means to have somebody that get into that deep cover like Joaquin Jack Garcia and Joe Pistone and now Mike McGowan. So let's talk a little bit about your book, a little bit about your history, I think. Michael, how did you get into the FBI?
Well, first, Gary, I want to make sure you understand, in the small world department, I was a classmate in Quantico with Ray Morrow.
Oh, really? Wow. I'm going to play golf with him in this February. I'm going down to Orlando area, and we're going to play golf again. We did last year, too.
Please pass along my hellos. I haven't talked to him in 30 plus years, but
I will.
Great man, great career. I got into the FBI via police work. I was a street cop for 4 or 5 years before I joined the FBI. I come from a police family. My dad was a cop. My granddad was a cop. My son is now a cop. So it's almost like we didn't have a choice. It was the family business. So I got into police work at a very young age. Loved it. Ran around doing police work, and kind of bumped into the FBI at a couple of crime scenes. And one of the recruiting agents told me to fill out an application at the time, which I never thought would go through, but I looked at the pay scale and jumped right on it. And about a year later, I got an invitation letter to Quantico.
Well, I know that was the route to the FBI. If you had you were a good, solid local copper that had 3 or 4 years experience, or, you had to go to law school or be an accountant or have a language or something. That was the other path in that, especially if you had local agents that would say, yeah, I know this guy. We need him. Why you were going to be in. I had a friend that did that back in the day. I was asked, but I didn't have a degree. So, and I never seemed to get up the oomph to get a degree for about 20 more years. But anyhow, so went to Quantico, and what was your first office?
My first office of assignment was in Philadelphia. Again, dropping names. I was on the same squad as Jack Garcia in Philadelphia. We were on a drug squad. And that's where I was first exposed to the undercover work. I was a case agent using undercover agents. Didn't understand the technique at first, but found it fascinating. And as you can imagine, there's no better evidence than a good guy sitting next to a bad guy with a tape recorder running. So I was interested in the undercover technique almost from the very beginning. The first couple of minor assignments I had, I was horrible and didn't do well, but I enjoyed it. And then for the majority of the remainder of my career, that's what I did pretty much on a full-time basis.
Really, I never really worked actually undercover. We worked plain clothes, and we followed mobsters around, went to the bars with them, see who their girlfriends were and that kind of thing, gathered intelligence and supported a lot of undercovers, did surveillance on them while they were maybe inside on talking to somebody, and we'd be available close by or maybe sitting up at the bar while they were sitting back at the table and be ready to take some kind of action if it was necessary. But it's tough, because I tell you what, all your habits that you learn, the language that you use, you have to be so careful with that language. You say something like, well, his vehicle. Well, to a bad guy, bad guys don't say your vehicle. Cops say your vehicle. And they know, it's like their antenna just shoots right up when you say some word like your vehicle.
100%. So there's a trade craft, a lot of which I never discuss in public, but there's ways to ingratiate. There's ways to infiltrate. The language is an issue. Plus, I worked undercover before there was any formalized FBI training, and their belief at the time was if you had been a cop, that you'd be a good undercover. But they didn't recognize you come from a chain of command, disciplinary paramilitary organization. So it took me a while to figure it out. And I actually tell people, and it's in the book, is the person I learned how to become an undercover was not an FBI agent. It happened to be a criminal who was an informant. And I literally spent hours and hours just picking his brain before I went into these assignments. So, it's a very different way of going about doing a law enforcement job.
Really, I had a kid tell me, he said, I can always tell you cops that are undercover. I said, what do you mean? He said, you touch your gun. And I said, oh, no. And then I started becoming aware of myself. When I had a gun stuck on my belt, I'd touch it periodically just to it's like touching your billfold or your keys, make sure you're there. You touch up at your belt or your gun, or maybe if you had it, somewhere else and you're small to your back, I'd reach in. All of a sudden I found out I did reach and touch it unknowingly. So that all those little body language cues, that's the stuff that gets gets the hair on the back of the bad guy's necks to stand up, and then they'll start, really doubting who you are. And if they don't have any other history on you, they'll really doubt you.
Mm-hmm.
So, was that informant? Was that Ron Previtte?
That was Ron Previtte out of Philadelphia. Yeah, there's a long story and history with him. I'm sure some of your listeners are aware of him.
Yeah. Let's talk about him a little bit first, and then we'll get into that Joey Merlino case.
Ron Previtte. So what happened was I had just come off a 2-year Russian organized crime undercover, and figured I'd take a break for a little bit. but I got a call from a friend of mine in Philadelphia. I had now transferred to the Boston division, and I got a call from a friend of mine in the Philadelphia division who was working the organized crime case down there, and he asked me to meet with Previtte and see if Previtte and I could figure out how to work together. And while I would target the Boston mob, Previtte would handle the Philadelphia mob. It was a very unusual alliance. They were trying to connect a guy named Bobby Luisi in Boston to Joey Merlino's faction down in Philadelphia, which is not a common, at that time, I had never even heard of two families working in that fashion, but it really didn't matter to the FBI. We had a chance to take a whack at, two separate groups.
Really?
So I met with Previtte. We hit it off from day one. As I tell many people, Previtte was never, is no saint.
Mhm.
He's done a lot of bad things in his life, but as far as a government informant, this is all public record. He's testified in court. He's passed away.
Yeah.
This is all a matter of court documents and public records, but he did a phenomenal job for the FBI during that investigation.
What was his history? When he a Boston or Philadelphia cop at one time himself?
Yeah, he served in the military. He was later a Philadelphia police officer. He was fired as a police officer for some unsavory acts. He went over to the other side. He worked security down in Atlantic City. He was involved in the horse racing industry. He had a colorful past for sure. And then he became connected to the Philadelphia organized crime, first with a boss down there named John Stanford.
Mm-hmm.
And then after Stanford, he associated with Joey Merlino.
Now, did Ron do you have any kind of like special area of crime that he was involved in for the mob? A lot of guys will have a specialty.
I'm not sure he had a specialty. He was kind of an all-around type of guy. He had his hand. I mean, I remember at one point him telling me he had fixed some horse urine to affect a racetrack event.
Yeah.
Like most mobsters, he wakes up figuring out what he needs to do that day to make a buck. So he would have his hands in all kinds of criminal activity, again, along with all the other members of the Philadelphia crew.
Yeah, Michael, that's a great way to put it. Like most mobsters, he wakes up every day then trying to figure out how to make a buck. I think Joe Pistone even talked about that crew he was associated with and Lefty Ruggiero, how each day they'd get together and they just constantly talk about different scams they could get into, how to make a buck that day.
Again, people don't understand when you're, especially when you're undercover against the mob, you spend hours and hours and hours with these people, and the criminal activity discussion is very limited. So you have to be able to talk, and that's what you do. You throw theories, ideas, scams out there. Yeah. So you'd sit around with these guys and you'd hear 10, 12 different ideas of how they were going to make a buck that day. They spent more time talking about it than actually doing it, but that's their mindset. It's how do I make a buck? And the reason they're susceptible to infiltration is you're somebody who can make them money, so they're interested in you.
Cool. So Previtte now, this Bobby Luisi, actually he was on the show. I think they said they called him Boston Bobby. Moved from the Boston family down to the Philly family. Now he's I don't know, it seemed like he got born again or got saved or something, did some time, came back out and turned his life around, and he's been on the show. So let's talk about him and Joey Merlino. How did you prove up that they had a connection between the two families then?
Yeah, well, again, there was an open investigation in Boston against Luisi and his crew. Luisi is a very well-known organized crime figure in Boston. He comes from a mob family. His dad was in the mob. So Boston had an open investigation against him. Philadelphia obviously had an open investigation against Merlino and his crowd. And once there was intelligence that the two of them were connecting to try to do business together, we were all ears. And because Previte was assisting the Philadelphia office, it made sense to see if an undercover could be introduced. Now, I could not meet Merlino when I was an agent in the Philadelphia office. I was part of an arrest team where we arrested Merlino on completely different charges years earlier, but I was part of that arrest team. And, the potential that he could recall, I have a distinctive mustache. The potential that he could recall me as a agent was something that we had to discuss, and we came up with the plan that as long as I just dealt with the Boston guys and not the Philadelphia guys, we should be okay. So Previte handled the Philadelphia side, and I handled the Boston side.
So now, was this a narcotics case in the end?
Well, we were investigating Luisi for a number of violations, to include drug trafficking. We knew that he dabbled in cocaine trafficking, but as any good undercover will tell you, you don't walk up to somebody you've never met and do a dope deal. So we had to start slow. We had a plan. I was introduced as a businessman. I had an import-export business. I worked out of Logan, where things sometimes fell off the back of a truck. And, I started out slowly with some stolen property. I sold, after Previte introduced me to them, I sold them stolen furs, cigarettes, TVs, cigarettes, just to show that I was an earner. I could make money.
And I have to wonder if that still works. Back in my day, that's what we did.
No, it's a different world now, and this is what I always, I get interviewed a lot, and people say, well, this is 30 years ago. Well, yeah, it's 30 years ago because I couldn't talk about any of this stuff for 30 years. I was still an active agent. This is all cases that have been adjudicated through the court system. What worked in 1999, would it work today? There's still some things that you can try to get away with, but it's obviously a different world.
Yeah, because that showing up, and that's why Joe Pistone got started. We had guys here in Kansas City that just, you go out and buy a whole bunch of gold jewelry and then say, hey, I got a really good deal, or I got all these TVs that fell off a truck, and you're immediately accepted as a bad guy because, like you said, you're making money.
You have to wet their whistle. You just can't sit. They don't deal with you because you're good looking or they like you. You got to have a reason to be there, and you also, you got to come around as a knockaround guy. You got to come around somebody who can't be played for a mark. You can't be somebody that they take advantage of. You got to, have a little bit of an edge to you, and that's what seems to allow undercovers to get inside.
Right. So how did it progress with Luisi?
Well, what happened was Previte went to Merlino and said that he had a guy up in Boston that he had worked with previously, and the guy was looking for some protection and somebody to work with up in the Boston area. And Merlino told Previte to connect his guy, Previte's guy, me, with Luisi and his crowd. There was no assurance that Luisi would take to it. We had to have a sit down. That happened in my office, but we also set it up in a way that he saw that I had a couple of bucks. I wasn't some street urchin just banging around on the street corners. Previte put us together, and in the first meeting, Luisi said to me at the end, "You're with us," which, as you know, in mob term is, I fall under his protection. So we, the first meeting was successful. And I tell people all the time that the reason the first meeting was successful was because of Previte, not me. Previte set the stage.
Yeah, he must have sold you pretty well.
Yep. But after that, after the first week, Previte went back to handle Philadelphia and that side, and I just went on my way in Boston.
So then how did that progress in Boston? Did you, you're giving your fencing stuff through him at a really good rate, I'm sure, and he was happy making money. Did he start introducing you to other people, or
Yeah, I got introduced, he would like to, Luisi, and again, you had him on your show apparently. Luisi, he's a charismatic guy when he wants to be. He talks the good talk, and he liked to almost show me off in a way. I'd have to go into the North End. That's the Italian section of Boston. I'd go in there and he'd introduce me to people, would spend time together in his, we just, because of, like I said, because of the introduction, and quickly I started selling them the stolen property. I also gave him a watch as a gift for allowing me to join his crew. So within weeks, if not a couple of months, I was in pretty tight with them. But it was also something where you had to spend a lot of time with them, hours and hours. People don't understand. They think you go in and 5 minutes later you walk out with a deal. It's just not that way. So I would spend, 8, 10, 12 hours a day just chumming up with them and getting them in a position that they trusted me enough to eventually do drug deals, and that's eventually where we led to.
Really, and I would imagine along that way you could pass off all kinds of good intelligence to the one squad or whatever, the organized OC squad there in Boston about who was a bookie and who wasn't, and how a lot of those regular things work. Just that gravy, if you will, from those interactions.
No, intelligence wise, I mean, I'm sitting in the lion's den with it.
Really?
I can see, talk to, watch everything going on. And so I would funnel all that information obviously back, but we had a pretty clear plan of what we intended to do. And again, I want to say, maybe I'm trying to think of the time period, but I would say within 3 or 4 months, I mean, he trusted me completely.
And to bring you in on narcotics operations, that was because there's such draconian sentences for dealing in narcotics, and I would imagine they would keep that on the down low and protect it as much as they could.
Well, again, there's this fallacy out there from Hollywood or whatever that the mob wasn't involved in drug trafficking.
Yeah,
nothing could be further from the truth. They just didn't want to get caught.
Yeah. So how did it work? How was Luisi's connection working?
Again, we knew from previous investigations what he was doing. So at one point, we made the strategic decision. I had come into possession of what were supposed to be some stolen diamonds, and I said to Bobby that the owner of the diamonds, who I had got the diamonds from, would sell them, but instead of cash, he wanted 3 bricks. And as soon as I said 3 bricks, Luisi pointed his finger at the ceiling and made a circular motion as if we were being recorded. And he pulled me out into the hallway, and then we went down in a private stairwell, and I had a recorder running, but he whispered in my ear, basically, I want to do that, but I don't want to get caught.
Yeah.
And so that's, basically, he was predisposed to drug trafficking. An offer was put on the table. He chose to pursue it. So we continued on, and eventually I ended up, I think I bought 3 kilos from him and his crew and negotiated for another 4 kilos, which in 1999 was a lot of dope.
What was it? Cocaine, you mean?
Cocaine, yep.
Cocaine. And so technically, how did that work? I'm always curious of, like, did he tell you to go be at a certain place and some other guy drops by and says, here's
what happened with the cocaine deal was, he agreed to sell it to me, but then there were a few delays, and eventually there was a telephone call arranged by Luisi with Merlino and Previte and me. The 4 of us got on a conference call.
Cool.
And Merlino gave the green light. That was disputed in court, but any FBI agent or mobster would understand he gave the green light. And within 48 hours, I had 2 kilos in my possession, both of which were marked with 215 on them. And if anyone knows 215, that's the area code from Philadelphia. So they were literally writing on the kilos, here you go. This is from Philadelphia. So like you said, Luisi wouldn't touch the dope. Merlino wouldn't touch the dope. So they sent them a mule, a kid named Bobby Carrozza. And if you research Boston mobsters, his dad, Carrozza Sr., was very influential in the Boston mob.
Mm-hmm.
So he was using Carrozza Jr. as the go-between. And then we ended up taking the cocaine in my office. And then we took a walk down the street and paid him at the hotel, at a hotel down the street. So we didn't mix the dope with the cash. We did it the way you're supposed to do a dope deal, so you don't look like an idiot when you do it. So
yeah,
within I think it was within 3 months, we had our first 2 kilos and conversations with Luisi, Carrozza, and his crew.
Really, for you guys that don't know out there, you try not to ever have the dope and the money in the same place. If something happens, you don't want to lose everything.
Well, you don't want
extra security.
You don't want to get robbed and shot. If
really,
that's probably not a good day.
Yeah, those dope deals with that big money, that's always fraught with like, is somebody going to get robbed here? Because it's so much money, it's so tempting that it's they're dangerous at very dangerous at best and deadly at their worst. Yeah, I bet you guys were, after you got Joey Merlino on the phone in that conversation, then you get the dope in your hot little hands with that area code on there. I bet they're running around doing the high fives and the victory dance since you're back in the squad room. Boy, I can't even imagine what that would feel like.
Well, that 215 written on the kilos, that was critical evidence. You might as well write the name on it. And again, this was all disputed later in court.
Yeah.
But we knew right then that we had enough evidence to charge Merlino, Luisi, Carrozza, and his crowd.
Cool. That was a coup. That was a real takedown there. Now, did they have to expose you when you did a takedown on that?
Well, what happened on that was I bought those two. That was the first deal. I did a second deal and I paid Luisi directly with the cash, which was critical evidence. They all got arrested. Philadelphia was on a timeline. We knew we had about 6 months to make a case. So Philadelphia was going to arrest in the summertime. So we did another deal with the Boston side, and then everybody got locked up in, I believe it was June or July. And then everybody in Boston pled guilty except Luisi. He went to trial, so I had to testify in federal court. His first conviction was overturned. He went to trial a second time. He was convicted again. And after that testimony, I had to go to Philadelphia and testify at the Merlino trial.
Now, what did they do with you? Did they take some extra precautions, transfer you out west here or something for a while, or what did they do with you?
I get asked about that a lot. I went about it when you're in, other undercovers may feel differently. An FBI agent, we're sworn to the United States Constitution, which says, people charged with crimes can face their accusers. So I didn't ask for any, I faced these guys on the street, the courtroom was no big deal.
Yeah.
And, it's just our system. If you're supposed to testify, you do. Now they play all kinds of games. They ask you your home address. They ask you for, how many children you have, all this nonsense. That's just, that's lawyers playing games. I did my job, and part of my job is testifying in court. So that's what I did.
Yeah. And there is with those old school mafia, real deal mafia types, there's some rules in there. At least that was always our experience here in Kansas City. There were certain rules and they also. Again,
there's no rules that are written down that you can check in a book.
Right. But there's rules.
But, I had a lot of, I had defendants later tell me after they were convicted, basically, you did your job, you were fair, you were square. So, no hard feelings. And that's just, people get excited about this testimony part. Like you have to wear wigs and have machines, that's not our Constitution.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
As a cop, as an agent, the day you're sworn in that you potentially can testify. That's part of the deal.
And you're
so
gonna
no, I didn't have any precautions taken.
Yeah. I've gotten to know a guy that I actually just helped. I was a sergeant and I directed the surveillance on him, that he went in, did about 10 years on he had a allotted ring, and he came back out, and since then he's got hold of me, and we meet for coffee periodically. And that's what he always says. He says, you guys just did your job and I did mine. And
right. He said, the government doesn't always win, believe me.
No, they don't.
In the Philadelphia case, Merlino was convicted of racketeering, but he beat the drug charge. So Previtte took the hit on, not Previtte, Luisi took the hit on the cocaine case, but Merlino beat that charge.
Yeah, I think I was thinking that he did. I couldn't remember for sure. He certainly hadn't spent that much time in jail over the last 10 or 15 years to do a long bid on a cocaine charge, because they would have given him a ton of time on a cocaine charge.
Well, again, his lawyer argued at trial when I testified. He showed all the audio and video up in Boston, and we did the dope deal, including a telephone call. But in Philadelphia, Previtte couldn't wear a wire all the time. Yeah. So a lot of it was, just straight testimony. And again, you put your best case together, you take your shot, and what happens. That's the system we work under.
Yeah. Now, Previtte, he would have been pretty easy to discredit him as a witness, to throw a lot of doubt about anything he would say, I would imagine, with his history.
No, they went after him pretty good.
Oh, I bet.
They went after me pretty good. And, you do your job and you testify to what happened, and that's up to a jury and a judge after that.
Yeah. Cool. That's a heck of a case, Michael. I'm telling you, I can't even imagine being part of that, even if we're just like the guy that was holding the radios back, to be on that squad, to be part of that case, to have that kind of a result. That would be cool. So you did a case in Rhode Island that ended up, was that after this?
Yeah, right after Luisi. Luisi lasted about 6 to 8 months, I think. And within a couple of more months, an opportunity was presented to us to take a whack at the Boston office covers Rhode Island.
Yeah.
And Rhode Island's the patriarchal family. And we knew that one of their captains, a guy named Matty Guglielmetti, was coming out of prison. And he was believed to position himself maybe to be the next boss. So we got a little bit proactive and developed a case where we were going to target Guglielmetti and the patriarchal crowd. So I went into that assignment, and I finished Luisi in 99, and I went into Guglielmetti in 2000.
Well, now, I'm glad you said that. I read that name. It's like, man, how do you pronounce that with Guglielmetti? Once you hear it, it's easy to say, but looking at it on a piece of paper, it's hard to figure out how to say it. Now, was he one of the guys that was recorded on that making ceremony, the famous making ceremony that the Boston office did on Raymond Patriarca Jr.?
Yep. So in October of 89, as I'm sure you're aware, the only time the FBI has ever recorded an induction ceremony was in Medford, Massachusetts. And Guglielmetti was one of the MAID members there that was inducting new members. And later in the case, that Rhode Island case took 5 years. I was undercover 5 years, a long, long time.
Wow.
I didn't meet Guglielmetti for almost 2 years into it, but once Guglielmetti and I became silent business partners. He brought up the induction ceremony one day, and I played dumb, and I asked him to explain it to me, and he laid it out soup to nuts,
really?
How it happened. So, there's a mob captain, verifying everything the government had alleged back in 89.
Wow. Now, what was your cover on that? Were you still using import-export business? Or
no, I changed completely. In this case, I was a very successful businessman out of the Midwest, actually. Huh. And I owned parking garages and I owned strip clubs.
Oh yeah, they like those strip clubs, don't they?
Yes, they do. And I was somebody who could throw some money around.
Yeah.
But Guglielmetti was, you got to understand the history of Rhode Island. Rhode Island for centuries have been the relationship between organized crime and politicians and union officials is just incredible down there. So we knew he was tight in the construction industry. So my persona was I was transitioning from parking garages, which was an all cash business, which is interesting to them.
Yeah.
And I was transitioning into the construction business. So we formed a construction company. We actually hired subcontractors. I had other FBI agents who come from construction backgrounds and financial backgrounds helping me. And we set up a whole company. Wow.
So what was Guglielmetti? What was his scam going to be? What did he bring to this?
Again, we didn't know initially. We wanted to establish a presence to see what moves Guglielmetti was going to make. Was he going to be Louis Monacchio was the boss? You probably recognize that name.
Yeah.
But he was in his 70s. He was on his way out the door to prison. So we knew somebody else was going to step up. And if it was going to be Guglielmetti, we wanted to track what he was involved in. So again, between the unions and between the construction industry's relationship with the public officials there, there was a lot of things to keep our eyes on. But again, we didn't know if Guglielmetti would bite. Like I said, I had a deal with another guy, one of his underlings, a guy named Bobby Natalillo. I had a deal with Natalillo for like a year and a half before he introduced me to Guglielmetti. So, the FBI had to be patient. And, this was something where I had to spend, in the Luisi case, I was introduced by Previtte. So I was already in. Here I went in cold. I didn't have anybody introduce me. I just showed up out of the blue one day and started doing my thing.
So how did, I guess, begs the question then, how'd you make your first contact if you didn't have anybody to introduce you in?
Well, we did have we had an informant initially, but he was not very reliable. So he identified a location where they would be running a gambling club. And I was invited to that gambling club knowing certain people would be there, not Guglielmetti, but other certain people. And I just went in there and worked the room cold. And by the time I was done that night, I had, gathered some phone numbers and we were off and running.
Cool. You start throwing a little money around. And I'm curious about this strip club thing. What are the scams that the mob has around strip clubs?
Well, again, I was an agent for 30 years. I worked a lot of organized crime. And in almost every city I was assigned to or went to, there was some type of nexus between organized crime and these strip clubs. You got to remember, it's a cash business. There's all kinds of shenanigans that go on in there. I went to another city. We had an FBI informant who owned a strip club, and he basically taught me the business. He showed me literally from buying liquor to scheduling the dancers to security, all of that. And I've used that repeatedly, or I did use that repeatedly over my career because they're always around it. You go into any strip club, gentleman's club, whatever they want to call it. It may look nice, it may look upscale, but at the end of the day, somebody's taking money out the back door, believe me.
Yeah. The same way here in Kansas City, they lined up about everyone in the city that they could. All of them but one, it seemed like the mob family got them all lined up. That their guy being a mover and shaker in all of them. And
well, that's also how we got Guglielmetti come out of the dark, because I was supposed to be looking at buying a club in Tampa, and I was getting some interference from the Tampa mob, Tampa mobsters. And Guglielmetti, after a year and a half of me being with Natalillo, he agreed to represent me, so to speak, and go down there and talk to it. He was actually talking to another undercover agent, which he didn't realize, obviously. But that's how we got our foot in the door. And the whole time I was meeting with them, our meeting place was a strip club in Providence, a place that's closed now, but it's called Centerfolds. that was like the meeting grounds.
I tell you what, and that's in a way that's part of the problem of working undercover, and especially when you work like you do, is you're constantly there's drinking all the time, and in these seedy kind of places like this.
Well, again, you got to set the tone, and I tell this, I still train undercover agents now, and I tell them everything you do as an undercover agent, especially in a situation like I was in, with women, booze, money all around. Every act is later going to be reviewed by a jury or a judge and the FBI. You can't do stupid things, pure and simple. So I would tell people, I'd establish right off the bat, I wasn't a big drinker.
Yeah.
I'd establish I had a girl. I wouldn't mix business with pleasure. I'm not going to take a dancer home because I'm thinking about buying the place.
Yeah.
So you have to set those guidelines very early on, and I did with them, and they were fine with it. Again, misconceptions. Mobsters, for the most part, aren't big drinkers.
Yeah, that's true. The real deal guys are not big drinkers.
The real hard guy, the real hard guy. The wannabes want to drink all day long.
Right.
The decision makers, they're businessmen. They're not going to be falling down drunk because they got to make financial decisions.
Right. And they'll have a girlfriend. They're gumare, as they say in the vernacular, but they don't whore around like that either. It was just every girl.
It's just, there's too many problems that come from that, And again, I'm an FBI agent. I never got into, you hear stories about agents blurring their identity, and that's not true. I knew I was an FBI agent. I wasn't a strip club owner or a player. I had a job to do, and that's just where the evidence was to be collected.
Which is why certain people get selected and certain people work that real deep undercover and certain other people don't work. They can be great agents or officers, but you do not want to put them in that situation.
There's a lot of temptation around. There is
ton
temptation.
of it,
And you just got to understand what your assignment is and go ahead and do it in the best, because later you're going to be sitting in a jury box and you need to explain to 12 regular people why you did what you did.
Yeah, really. So what happened with Guglielmetti?
Again, we spent a lot of time with Guglielmetti before I actually met him. Again, going back to the drug world, we knew that they were involved in drug trafficking. So we set up some drug protection details where the mob would protect drugs that belong to us, physical security. Mm-hmm. We did that a couple of times. There was money to be made there. So Guglielmetti kind of took a cut of that. And then we did some construction projects. We did some interactions with it became all encompassing because it wasn't a straight organized crime case. There was a public corruption aspect to it. There was some union corruption to it. So it kind of went in a couple of different directions. But basically, for the last 3 years of the investigation, Guglielmetti was my silent partner in that construction company I met. So he would take me around, introduce me. And, eventually he was charged with the we did some more drug protection details, which he was actively involved in. We actually supervised it together. And again, this is all on video and audio tape. There was no disputing it. So when he was charged, he actually pled guilty within the first week or two because, he was embarrassed that we had got inside.
Yeah, really. So by the public corruption cases, he would introduce you to certain public officials that would then you would able to slide them some money under the table in order to get contracts.
Exactly.
Same way with union people.
The history, exactly. The history in Rhode Island it's been a very, very corrupt state for many, many years. We knocked out some of the laborers' unions officials, including the national level. It was a very, very widespread investigation into the relationship between those factions in Rhode Island.
So he would take, and then he would get a little piece of that action. He was getting a piece of your construction company, and he was connecting you up with the right union people to, beat them on union contracts or maybe hire non-union people to keep the overhead down.
Yeah. Again, what I said earlier in our conversation, they wake up every day figuring out how they're going to make a buck. So when he became my silent partner, I would bring every opportunity to him, whether he wanted to do it or not.
Yeah.
For example, we did some money laundering. And I went straight to him, said, listen, Matty, here's the opportunity. Here's what I'm doing. As you know, in money laundering, you have to identify the SUA, the specific unlawful activity. And I made it clear it was drug trafficking. He didn't want to hear it, but he wanted to take the cash. And he ended up taking, I think, 18 grand or 20 grand for a dope deal.
Interesting. Now, one last question, and I'm going to let you get on with your day, Michael. I really appreciate you being on the show. On that drug protection, how did that work? I mean, you were like providing security for what he thought was somebody else's stash, large stash of cocaine.
Yes, I introduced another undercover agent as a drug trafficker.
Okay.
And that agent was moving drugs from New York City up to Canada. The drugs had to sleep or park overnight in Rhode Island, and they needed to be protected. So they would protect it. They knew it. We would show them the kilos. We would show them that it was drug trafficking.
Yeah.
They knew what they were doing, and they would send armed people to protect it. In the federal system, once they know that is drugs, it's just like they're distributing it or possessing it. It's generally the same federal guidelines on that. But because they were the mob in our eyes, and we were enthralled to be dealing with them, we asked them to protect it so nobody would steal our drugs.
So then he just dispatched a couple of associates over there, guys that he had influence over, wanted to be part of his crew.
Yeah, he had a whole crew that he used. There was guys who would sit in the room. There were guys who watched a parking lot. It was a whole staged event.
I see.
But we brought them all in to make sure they all understood.
That's slick. I've never heard of that before. That's why I had to ask. That's slick.
Yeah, no, that's something that, we had done that in other parts of the country. Again, I'm not revealing any trade secrets.
Right.
This stuff has all gone through the court system.
Yeah, it's all been out there.
But as you know, if you're an organized crime guy, their greediness will always
win out. That's for sure. All you got to do is appeal to making them some money, and they're going to bite in some way. Maybe
they're always going to argue. You set them up. You made them do things. You give them the opportunity. Every case I ever worked, I have a famous line I use when I'm negotiating with them, and I say, "There's the door. If you don't want to do this, leave." And that's the first tape we usually play for the jury.
Yeah, you were
given an opportunity to walk away.
You were taking advantage of what they call FOMO, fear of missing out.
Well, they made their decisions. I like mob guys for the most part. They're funny guys. They're fun to be around. They just, they have a little problem with conducting criminal activity, and that's where
I don't know, of several professional criminals over my career, and I'm sure you ran into this. You just want to say, dude, with your charisma and your knowledge and your brains and your work ethic, why don't you get into something where you can make legitimate money? You could do well. And I asked one guy that. He said, I don't know, it wouldn't be fun.
Exactly. They love the thrill. And, you're right. Some of the mob guys I dealt with were some of the most brightest guys I come across. They had, especially business acumen, and they understood how to make a buck. It just did making it on the other side.
Hell, it wouldn't be so exciting. All right. Retired Special Agent Michael McGowan. Why don't you say the name of the book and how people can find that?
The book is named Ghost, My 30 Years as an FBI Undercover Agent. It's on Amazon and Barnes & Noble. And take a shot and see what I did for the last 30 years.
All right. It's going to be a thrill-a-minute ride in that book. It's going to be like, everybody loves Joe Pistone and Donnie Brasco, but these stories are just as thrilling and in some ways, maybe a little more so. And so I recommend you get that book, folks. Thanks a lot, Michael. I really appreciate you coming on the show.
Thank you, Gary. Appreciate it.
Well, folks, that ends another Gangland Wire episode. I really appreciate you tuning in and listening. however you listen to it, whether it's on the website or on one of the apps. I also want to express my thanks and sincere appreciation for the kind reviews that you've given me on the app, the Apple app, or some of the other podcast apps. I don't check them. I used to check them when I first did this. I checked them a lot, but I don't check them anymore so much. Once in a while, I look at them. Sometimes I get my feelings hurt, especially on YouTube, but that's okay. If you put yourself out there, you better not have a thin skin. I've learned that. My most recent documentary, I really want to express extra appreciation to the people that stepped up and helped me finance that movie and able to increase the production values, hired a professional to do the reenactment scenes and some of the other things, and got some better music I had to pay for. And we have it out now. Now, the last time I did one of these endings for the podcast, I had a different title. I changed the title just at the last minute. It's now About Theft, Burglary, Murder, and Cover Up. So I encourage you to come on the website. I can't get it on Amazon like I have Brothers Against Brothers and Gangland Wire, because they changed their rules. And if I can't get a theatrical release, like a major film studio, or get it in a major film festival, which is kind of like, I don't know what it's like. It's dang near impossible unless you're politically connected to some of the people that run these film festivals. And a guy like me doesn't really have a chance. It's been my experience. I fought that a few years back and I gave up. It's too much effort for too little payoff. But if you want to stream it, it's on my website for $1.99. I figured out a way to do that. And you pay me $1.99 and I will send you a link to stream it, as well as my other two movies. You want to stream them for $1.99. Of course, I have the DVDs for sale. Or if you make a donation, why, I'll give you the DVD and give you a streaming link too, or a book or Kindle book, whatever you want. You guys kind of know the drill by now if you've been listening to it. If not, just go to my donate page. One last thing, I've kind of dogged off on this PTSD thing. I used to always want to try to promote that. So if you've been listening to the podcast, you know what to do. But if you have any problems with PTSD and and you're a veteran, then go to the VA. If not, go to the VA website or just Google VA hospital PTSD, and they've got a hotline and they've got a lot of resources. And even if you're not a veteran, or if you just know a veteran, you can go there and find the resources. If you're not a veteran, you can go there and find resources. So I appreciate all your support over the years, and we'll see you again next week, or listen to you next week, or you'll listen to me. Music provided by our good friend and super fan from Portland, Oregon, Casey McBride. Thanks, Casey.